Hello, this is S.K. Williams, and today I would like to talk to you about Star Wars! More specifically, I would like to talk to you about the Star Wars series, Star Wars The Acolyte, which is streaming on Disney+. And more specifically, I would like to talk to you about a topic within the series that has become quite controversial. That being the Immaculate Conception of the twins who are the primary main characters of this series, Osha and May, who had an Immaculate Conception via what is being derogatorily called lesbian space witches. And many people point out that this isn't the first Immaculate Conception in Star Wars, because Anakin Skywalker also had an Immaculate Conception, being born of a virgin by a virgin in the Force. And, of course, all of this is inspired by the Immaculate Conception of Jesus within the womb of the Virgin Mary. And it has become controversial precisely because people feel that a series set 100 years before the Star Wars prequels has just undermined the unique and special nature of Anakin Skywalker by having an Immaculate Conception before Anakin's Immaculate Conception. And the complaint about the Immaculate Conception of Osha and May is one of those things that's in virtually every video that has complained about the Acolyte, and in even some of the videos that are supportive of it. And of course, as noted, it all goes back to Jesus and the Immaculate Conception of Jesus within the womb of the Virgin Mary. However, this video is not me either defending the Acolyte and the Immaculate Conception of May and Osha, and trying to explain how it doesn't undermine the Immaculate Conception of Anakin, nor is it me being critical of the story decision to have Osha and May born via Immaculate Conception by lesbian space witches. And I'm not going to make the point that their Immaculate Conception 100 years before Anakin Skywalker's Immaculate Conception undermines the special nature of Anakin Skywalker's Immaculate Conception. Rather, what I'm going to do is explain the actual problem with using the term Immaculate Conception, because people are not using it correctly, and it irritates me as someone with a religious studies degree. That's right. This is actually a stealth video that's about religion! But nevertheless, the topic of the video is not an attempt to prove or disprove any doctrines, so I'm really not trying to start a debate on this one in terms of if Christianity is true or if what I'm about to tell you about the Immaculate Conception is an accurate doctrine, or if it is indeed something to be rejected. But what I will do is simply explain what the Immaculate Conception actually is. And most people already know what it is, don't they? That's why they're bringing up the Immaculate Conception of May and Osha in the Acolyte, and how Anakin had an Immaculate Conception, and the entire point of the debate is if the Immaculate Conception of Osha and May undermines the Immaculate Conception of Anakin. And of course, as pointed out, it goes back to the Immaculate Conception of Jesus within the womb of the Virgin Mary. Everyone knows an Immaculate Conception is when one is conceived without a father within the womb of a virgin. That is what the Immaculate Conception means. It means that someone is born via a virgin birth. Jesus being the prime example, because he was born of the Virgin Mary. His conception was immaculate. Jesus had an Immaculate Conception within the womb of the Virgin Mary. But here's the thing. No, Jesus did not have an Immaculate Conception within the womb of the Virgin Mary. What's more, no Christian actually believes that Jesus was born via Immaculate Conception. What I've just said, of course, sounds preposterous. Everyone knows that Christians believe Jesus was immaculately conceived. Everyone knows that Jesus had an immaculate conception within the womb of the Virgin Mary. They sing about it every Christmas in the virgin birth. But therein lies the problem. For you see, as much as the audience is hearing me say Jesus did not have a virgin birth, when I say Jesus was not immaculately conceived, in reality, I have not actually denied he had a virgin birth. And at this point, I probably sound utterly insane, since it's the same thing. Being immaculately conceived means being conceived without a father by a virgin. So, immaculate conception and virgin birth mean the same thing, or maybe not exactly the same thing. Because immaculate conception refers to your conception within the womb, while virgin birth refers to your birth, but it's still a difference without much of a distinction for most people. Jesus clearly had an immaculate conception, and this is one of the core foundational beliefs of Christianity. This is why it's the basis of Anakin's immaculate conception within the womb of the presumptive virgin Shmi Skywalker, and why the lesbian space witches who did not have men with them used the power of the thread, what they call the Force, to generate Osha and May via forced immaculate conception. But therein lies the point. You see, immaculate conception does not refer to being conceived within someone's womb without a father or without sexual union. Immaculate conception does not refer to a virgin birth. Immaculate conception refers actually to Mary and not to Jesus. Mary is the one who had the Immaculate Conception. The Immaculate Conception is actually a Catholic doctrine, and it is one that, for the most part, in general, Protestants don't adhere to. And most other groups who are not Protestant also don't adhere to it. Because in Catholic theology, the doctrine of the Immaculate Conception teaches that Mary was conceived without the stain of original sin. She was still conceived via a normal sexual union of her mother and her father, but via a divine intervention, she was born without the stain of original sin. That is what the term Immaculate Conception actually means. The term Immaculate Conception refers to Mary being conceived within her mother's womb without the stain of original sin. The term Immaculate Conception does not refer to Jesus being conceived within the womb of the Virgin Mary without a father, without sexual union. The term Immaculate Conception does not mean the same thing as a virgin conception. Immaculate Conception specifically refers to Mary being born without the stain of original sin. Jesus had a virgin birth. Jesus would have also, of course, had a virgin conception before his virgin birth. Jesus did not have an immaculate conception. It would not have been necessary for him to have an immaculate conception anyway, since he obviously could not have inherited a sinful nature from his father, since he had no human father to begin with, and he could not inherit a sinful nature from his mother, because Mary did not have a sinful nature. Because Mary was immaculate. The term immaculate refers to being born free of original sin. And while Jesus was also born without original sin, it is because he was conceived within the womb of someone who also was free of original sin. And that is the distinction. The reason we refer to Mary having an immaculate conception, at least within Catholicism, is precisely because everyone else is born with an inherited sinful nature. Now, people may ask, if God could do that, why not just do that with everyone? Which is a complex theological issue, but it has been addressed before, centuries ago. The general answer to that is that the physical world that we're in is actually a reflection of a spiritual reality. So, one of the problems, especially that you encounter with the type of anti-Christian atheist, is that they think in purely material terms, and they act as if Christianity is childish, and they worship Sky Daddy, and everything's about this world, when it's really not. But the reason God doesn't just make everyone born by immaculate conception and get rid of original sin and thus abolish sin that way is because original sin is an expression of a spiritual reality that does not go away just because you have eliminated it within a physical world. In fact, eliminating it within a physical world by making everyone born by immaculate conception, which would only last one generation because no one is referred to as immaculately conceived if their parents don't have original sin. We've just covered that. But do keep in mind, Adam and Eve themselves sinned, and they also did not bear the stain of original sin. And at this point, the stain of original sin is not simply a physical issue, but also involves the spirit, and man, in terms of the spirit, exists prior to being born. There's more to it than this, of course, and I will elaborate on it in a future video, God willing. But for now, I'm just going to leave it at that. There is a reason why God doesn't just make everyone born via immaculate conception and get rid of original sin. Mary, being also someone who God knew before she was conceived within her mother's womb, was deemed worthy of the honor of carrying God. That is why she is called the Theotokos to the Orthodox, the God-bearer. That is why Catholics refer to her as the Mother of God, as do certain other groups, such as High Church Anglicans. Because she was literally the Mother of God in terms of his physical body on earth. But just as God existed before he became man in the person of Jesus, so too did the spirit of Mary exist before she was born and became Mary as we understand her. And because her spirit remained pure unto God and obedient unto God prior to this, because she already expressed that deep love and deep connection for God, she was spared the mark of original sin. And do keep in mind, even the story of the Garden of Eden, where original sin would have entered man, is not simply about them eating fruit. There is a spiritual dimension to this, and many theologians don't think that the fruit was actually fruit, or if it was, there was anything special about it. What made it confer the knowledge of good and evil was simply the act of disobedience. And even if there was something else to it, the idea behind it is not simply eating fruit. And it certainly isn't, once you eat this fruit, you gain knowledge. There was this stupid atheist argument that goes that God is cruel for setting these people up because before they ate the fruit, they wouldn't have known the difference between good and evil, so why would you expect them to obey it? Isn't this punishment wrong? Well, this equates knowing right from wrong with knowing good and evil, the assumption being that if you don't have the knowledge of good and evil, then you can't possibly know this is wrong to do, but you can, because animals also lack a moral sense in the way that humans have them, but you can condition them or train them to know certain things will get them into trouble. Even without moral culpability, they can know certain things cause adverse reactions. They know right and wrong, just not good and evil, which is a deeper, more metaphysical sense. Good and evil and its knowledge also takes on the reality of what you have done. Most people know, or at least knew in the past, people are becoming less aware of things, that the Bible doesn't just use the word to know to mean having awareness of it intellectually. But most people limit this to sexuality, where we'll talk about how a man knew a woman, and we're not talking about he met her and knew who she was, we're talking about he had sex with her. Well, we know that when people say a man knew a woman in the Bible, it means that they had sex, but we treat that as a euphemism for sex and limit it to sex. But with the knowledge of good and evil, we act as if Adam and Eve simply did not have intellectual awareness of good and evil, that they ate the fruit, and all of a sudden they do. It conferred information to them. But that's all that it did, apparently, other than, of course, somehow giving them a sinful nature. But that's the point. It's not this mysterious thing of how did gaining knowledge change their nature. It changed their nature because to know something is not simply to be aware of it or to understand it intellectually. Adam and Eve knew good and evil by actively participating in the evil, and actively having something now to contrast that to the good. Their knowledge of good and evil stems from the fact that they have now experienced it. Much like a man having sex with a woman experiences that woman, just as the woman experiences the man. This is not simply an intellectual knowledge. It is a knowledge that one gains by having done it. This is also why the criticism that they wouldn't have been able to know right and wrong is invalid. They knew God said not to do so, and they could have obeyed that. They just didn't know what it felt like to disobey. And again, this conveys a higher spiritual truth. And spiritual in this context is not talking about some vague notion that modern people who are spiritual but not religious are talking about. It is talking about something that is concrete and has its own fundamental nature. And all of that is important to know and will be discussed in a longer video dedicated to this topic. But for now, all that we need to know is this: the reason why God did not simply make everyone born by Immaculate Conception from Adam and Eve's children to free them from original sin is because the act was more than just a physical act. It was an act that affected a higher spiritual reality. It was an act that more than likely originated in that spiritual reality and that we are reflections of. Mary, while also, of course, being as human as others and impacted by that, would have nevertheless loved God and honored God, even as a spirit, and was chosen, due to her purity, to be given this Immaculate Conception. Because she would be the vessel that God himself would use to come to Earth. So, that is why she was given an Immaculate Conception, and no one else was. Because you do not resolve an issue of sin by simply removing the physical manifestation of sin. It must go to the spirit, which is a very real, very defined concept within Christianity, and is not a vague sense of spirituality. And man is triune, just as God is, because man was created in the image of God. And by man, I'm referring to humanity in general, which means women are included in this as well. Man has three parts: the body, the soul, and the spirit. In the modern world, we like to think of soul and spirit as synonyms and think of Christianity as dualist, having a body and a soul. And saying body and soul is the same as saying body and spirit, but they're actually not the same thing. Though because of modern culture, it's difficult to explain the distinction between soul and spirit, because the soul is the life force that animates who we are, and the spirit is the sort of person you are. The closest thing I can give in short is that the spirit would be more like your mind or your persona, your personality, whereas your soul is your life. The problem with presenting it that way, though, is the assumption that the soul is nothing more than an energy force that keeps you alive, but has no mind or will of its own. In reality, the soul also has thoughts. The spirit is not identical to your entire mind, and your soul is not a mindless energy force. Your soul has thoughts and beliefs and feelings on its own, but they are distinct from those of the spirit, which is more akin to your personality, your conscious mind, if you will. Think of it using Jungian psychology, where you have a conscious and unconscious mind. For now, we're not going to talk about the universal unconscious. I'm just trying to get a concept across. The spirit would be the conscious mind, and the soul would be the unconscious, for want of a better term. This is an imperfect analogy, but it derives the point home. Having said all of that, because of this triune nature of man, and because both the soul and the spirit are immanent to God and transcend the barriers of time that we normally think of, the knowledge of good and evil within man is something that affects man at that higher level. Once Adam sinned, all those who were in line to follow Adam, and they are connected, and I'll explain that in a future video as well, would have also gained this, all without having yet been born. They have all participated in that same rebellion. So simply making everyone born via an Immaculate Conception right after Adam and Eve sinned, it would have eliminated the sinful nature of the flesh. But, since the urge to sin came from the spirit itself, it would simply manifest in another way. But with Mary it was different, at least in Catholic thought. With Mary, she loved God as a spirit, even before her incarnation on earth to live her predetermined human life that was already supposed to occur. And I'm not talking about predestination completely, because Catholics do believe you have free will, but what I'm saying is that she was going to be born at some point as a human. Mary was given the gift of an immaculate conception because of this love of God that she had. And this immaculate conception, making her born free of her sinful nature, made her the perfect vessel for God himself to enter the world as man. And that is why Mary had an immaculate conception. Because not only does this mean that her flesh, her physical body, is now free of the stain of original sin, but it also means that her spirit loved God so much that she isn't as tempted to that sin as others, and was kept pure from it by a special grace of God, not dragged down by it. And that is what the term Immaculate Conception means. That is what it's referring to. It is referring to Mary being born without the stain of original sin. That is what the term Immaculate Conception actually means. The term Immaculate Conception does not refer to Jesus being conceived within the womb of the Virgin Mary. Jesus did not have an Immaculate Conception. And bringing this back to Star Wars, Anakin did not have an Immaculate Conception. Anakin was born of a virgin. That is not the same thing as an Immaculate Conception. And at this point, thanks to Disney, 100 years earlier, the lesbian space witches used the power of the thread to produce Osha and May. But they too did not have an immaculate conception. They had a virgin birth. Or at the very least, they had a birth that was not generated by a sexual union between a man and a woman. The same with Anakin can be said. We don't actually know if Shmi was a virgin, but we do know that Anakin, at least, is supposed to be understood as being born without a father being involved in his conception. But that isn't what an immaculate conception is. That is imparthenogenesis. That is a virgin birth. That is not an immaculate conception. And it really does bother me because people are going about saying that the twins in the Acolyte had an immaculate conception, and this undermines the immaculate conception of Anakin, when Jesus didn't even have an immaculate conception. It is simply not the correct term to use. Having said all that, I shall take my leave of you now. I hope this video has been informative. I hope you have enjoyed it. And I haven't much else to say. So, may the thread be with you! Or, if you are a traditionalist, something Pope Francis doesn't like, apparently, a rigid traditionalist, may the Force be with you. And, as always, thank you, God bless, and goodbye.